I didn't fall in love with him. Not really. I fell in love with the way he said my name. Like it was something delicate, dangerous. Like if he said it too loud, the whole world might hear what we weren't ready to admit. The first time it happened, we were standing too close in a too small office kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. And I felt him behind me before I even turned around. "Hey," he said, voice low, warm. Then my name. Soft. Slow. Like a whisper slipped between thoughts he shouldn't have been having. And something about it, God. It hit me so deep in my chest I forgot what I'd even walked in there for. I think I laughed. Nervous, too quick. I remember avoiding his eyes, pretending to reach for a mug I didn't need, just to avoid the weight of his gaze. Because that was the other thing. He didn't look at me like a coworker. Not anymore. His eyes lingered like he was memorizing something. Like he was searching for a reason to stay just a little longer. And the worst part? I let him. I let those stolen glances live in my head long after I got home. I let the sound of my name in his mouth echo against my skin as I lay awake, wondering how we got here. Because I wasn't supposed to want him. I had someone I loved. But this man, the one with the careful voice and the storm-colored eyes, he was unraveling me with nothing more than syllables and silence. And I knew even then, before anything actually happened, something already had. That night I told myself it was harmless. A moment. A fluke. People say each other's names all the time. It doesn't mean anything. But then why did it follow me into the shower? Why did I close my eyes and hear it again? That hush in his voice, the almost reverent way he said it, like he was tasting it for the first time. I pressed my palms flat against the tile, trying to will it out of me. But it stayed. It stayed when I climbed into bed beside a man I'd promised my heart to. It stayed as I felt his arm settle around my waist, familiar and warm. And yet, not the fire I'd felt hours before when a different man stood too close and breathed my name like it was a secret. I didn't touch my fiancé that night. I couldn't. I just lay there, eyes wide in the dark, wondering if emotional betrayal starts like this. Not with a kiss, but with a look. A pause. A name. The next day at work I avoided him. I took the long way around the floor, made up excuses to stay buried in meetings. But he didn't chase me. He watched. And when I finally passed by his office, our eyes met, just for a second, and I swear I felt it again. That invisible thread pulling me toward him. That ache. And I hated myself for feeling it. Because the truth is, I loved the man I was with. He was kind, steady, good. But he never made my name feel like a secret. He never made my skin tense in anticipation from across a room. He never looked at me like he already knew what I tasted like in the dark. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't seen him. But my legs were weaker than they should have been. And that one glance had undone every wall I'd spent years building. I wasn't ready for what was coming. But I was already leaning toward the fall. I didn't plan for it to keep happening. But the universe, or whatever cruel God oversees office layouts, kept pushing us closer. We started crossing paths more often. Meetings. Hallway brushes. Quiet moments in shared spaces that suddenly didn't feel so neutral anymore. And he never crossed the line. Not really. He never touched me. Never said anything you could quote back in a scandal. But his presence, that was something else. It was the way he leaned in just slightly when I spoke. The way his gaze dropped to my lips when I laughed too freely. The way he said my name, God, always my name, like it carried layers he was peeling back slowly just for him. I tried to pretend it wasn't getting to me. But then one afternoon we were both staying late, separately supposedly, and I walked into the break room and found him there again like déjà vu. The lights were dim. The building was quiet. He looked up from the coffee machine and said it again. My name. But this time it sounded different. Rougher. Like he'd been holding it in too long. Didn't think anyone else was still here, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I opened my mouth to speak, some polite nothing, but the words didn't come. Because something shifted. The silence stretched thick and charged. And I realized I wasn't breathing. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that I could feel the heat of him. I should have stepped back. I should have said anything. But I didn't. I stood there, completely still, as my heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted out. Because in that moment it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about how I felt. And every nerve in my body was screaming the same thing. He's about to kiss you. And you want him to. He didn't kiss me. He didn't have to. The not kissing said more than anything else could have. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the weight of his breath mixing with mine, like we were sharing the same air, like he was exhaling something he hadn't dared say out loud. My name. It lingered between us again, unsaid this time. But it was still there, thick on his tongue, hovering behind his eyes. He looked at me like he wanted to memorize every inch of the space between us. Like if he blinked, the spell might break. And part of me wanted it to, because I could still feel the ring on my finger. Heavy, suffocating, suddenly unfamiliar. But another part of me, that part had already forgotten what it meant to feel safe. Because this wasn't safe. This was alive. I should go, I whispered. It was the only sentence I could manage. He didn't move. He didn't nod. He just watched me, eyes soft and unblinking, like he was recording the moment for later. I know, he said. And it wasn't just words. It was understanding. Regret. Hunger held back by the thinnest thread of restraint. I turned away before I lost the little control I had left. My hands trembled as I gathered my things. My reflection in the darkened office windows looked like someone I didn't recognize. Flushed, breathless, a little undone. When I finally stepped out into the night air, I felt cold and burning all at once. And I realized something that made my stomach twist. I hadn't kissed him, but I'd wanted it. So badly. Worse, he knew. He could feel it in the way I'd looked at him. And there's a particular kind of intimacy in almost. In the breath before. In the pause. In the hunger that doesn't get fed. Sometimes it's more dangerous than anything that actually happens. Because it leaves you wondering, what if I hadn't stopped? After that night I tried to build walls. I buried myself in routine, in guilt, in all the little rituals that made me feel like a good person. Like someone who hadn't just teetered on the edge of betrayal. I went home earlier. Kissed my fiancé more often. Cooked dinner. Smiled. But inside I was somewhere else entirely. I was in that break room, frozen in that breathless space between what we almost did and what we still hadn't. I kept thinking, if I avoided him long enough the feelings would fade. But they didn't. They multiplied. Because once you know what it feels like to be seen like that, to have someone say your name like it means something secret and sacred, you start noticing what you're not getting everywhere else. My fiancé said my name a dozen times a day, casually, kindly. But never like that. Never like a secret. Never like a sin he wanted to commit slowly. And so I started listening for him. I'd tune my ears toward footsteps in the hall, just to hear if he was near. I'd freeze when someone said his name in a meeting, my heart tightening without permission. I'd scan the room just to catch a glance, a flicker of him, his shirt sleeves rolled, fingers curled around a coffee cup, gaze slipping toward mine before darting away too late. He was pulling away too, I could feel it. Like he knew he'd gotten too close. Like he didn't trust himself either. But then one Thursday we were assigned to a project together. Just us. Late nights. Shared documents. One-on-one strategy calls. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. That first meeting we didn't say much beyond the work. But when we both reached for the same pen, stupid, cliché, perfect, our fingers touched. And I felt everything all over again. His eyes met mine. Just briefly. But in that glance, he said it again without words. Your name still lives on my tongue. And I still haven't forgotten how you looked when you wanted me. The late nights started to blur together. Conference rooms dimmed by sunset. The hum of computer screens. Our voices softening as the building emptied. As if we were afraid to be overheard by the ghosts of our own restraint. I kept telling myself nothing had happened. But everything was happening. In the way we stood too close when we didn't need to. In how our hands brushed when passing papers, slow enough to make it feel intentional, fast enough to deny it if we had to. In how he started saying my name less often. And yet every time he did, it felt heavier. One night, we were both leaning over the same laptop, our shoulders pressed together. The air between us was thick. Charged in that unspoken way that happens when desire has nowhere else to go. He pointed at the screen. Something about a file we needed. But I wasn't looking at the file. I was looking at his mouth. And I think he knew. Because his hand moved just slightly and rested against the edge of the desk, right beside mine. Close enough that I could feel the heat. But not touching. Not yet. My fingers trembled. And then, like he couldn't take it anymore, he reached over and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. Slow, gentle, devastating. His fingertips grazed my cheek in the process, and my entire body lit up, like a match had struck somewhere deep under my skin. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Because that one touch, it undid me. He didn't apologize, didn't step back. He just looked at me. And in that look I saw every thought he'd been trying not to think. I shouldn't, he murmured. His voice was tight, raw, but he was still standing close. And I was still leaning in. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us. Maybe it was inevitable. But when our lips met, it was soft, slow, like an apology and a confession all at once. And in that kiss, quiet, aching, forbidden, he said my name again. Not out loud, but I felt it, in every trembling breath. And I let him. We didn't speak right after. We just stood there, lips parted, breath shared, hearts too loud in the silence. His hand was still at my jaw, fingers curved so gently it almost broke me, like he thought if he held me too tight I'd disappear. I didn't disappear. I melted. Right there in his arms, in that quiet room filled with all the things we couldn't say. And when he pulled me closer, arms sliding around my waist like a promise he hadn't meant to make, I didn't resist. Because the way he held me wasn't just about wanting. It was about knowing. Knowing what this meant. Knowing it would change everything. And choosing it anyway. I buried my face against his shoulder, eyes stinging, and whispered, I don't know what I'm doing. His voice broke when he answered, Me neither. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, tangled in silence, too afraid to name what had already happened. Eventually I stepped back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Reality doesn't pause for passion. I drove home in a fog, the scent of his skin still clinging to my clothes. I crawled into bed beside a man who loved me, who didn't know I was already slipping away. He asked if I was okay. I lied. I kissed his forehead, curled into his side, and tried to swallow the guilt. But nothing felt right anymore. Because while my body was here, my heart was still in that office, still hearing his voice, still feeling the heat of that kiss, soft and quiet and soul-stealing. I didn't just betray someone, I betrayed myself. Because I had always believed love was a choice. But desire chooses you. And once it has you, it doesn't let go. I thought the kiss would be the end. A single shattering mistake. One night, one weakness folded into silence and buried beneath guilt. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of long glances across crowded rooms. Of invented meetings. Of moments that felt too tender to be accidents. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't make plans. But we kept finding each other. And with every touch, every whisper, every brush of his hand at the small of my back, I lost a little more of who I was before him. Until one night, he stopped me as I turned to leave. He reached for my wrist so gently and said my name. Just that. But it landed like a prayer. Like something sacred he wasn't sure he had the right to speak out loud. And when I looked at him, I realized something that terrified me more than the guilt, more than the risk. I didn't fall for the man. I fell for the way he made me feel real. Seen. Desired. Named. Not the version of me who smiled for holiday cards or picked out linens, but the one who pulsed beneath the surface, wild, soft, aching to be undone. We never said, I love you. We didn't have to. Because in those stolen hours, that quiet orbit, we lived the feeling. It was selfish. It was wrong. And it was the most honest I've ever felt. Eventually it ended, as things like this always do. Not with a fight. Not with tears. Just time. Space. The kind of silence that grows too loud to ignore. We went back to our lives. Back to the people who thought they knew us. But some nights, when the house is quiet, when I'm lying awake beside someone who loves me the way he's supposed to, I still hear my name. The way he said it. Like it was something precious. Something secret. Something that never really belonged to anyone else.